And we're live.
Hello, welcome to Mad Dodge Productions. Welcome to the World War I stream. This week we are on the Battle of Cambrai. Is that how you pronounce that? Hey, I got it right. Nice. We're on a roll. We're doing great. I'm joined here by Farty, who is generously hosting today. Thank you very much, sir. And as always, MC, how are you doing?
Doing well, doing well.
All right, guys. Whoever wants to start us off, you know how this goes. I'm pretty much the bystander. I sit here and ask the questions, and you guys lead the show. So go ahead.
MC?
So the Battle of Cambrai was a battle initiated in the latter part of 1917. Now, there's a number of things that have gone on, all right, that is really causing the Allies to try and move quickly because of what's been happening. All right. First of all, you now have the Bolshevik Revolution taking place. All right, in Russia, there's a major concern, and rightly so, obviously, amongst the Allies, that Russia is being knocked out of the war. And so they're in a hurry. Why? Because all the reinforcements, all right, that the Germans could bring back from the fighting the Russians now can be brought into this theater of the war. So they're looking for a way to win some major victories in order to blunt what's coming. Okay.
Yeah, but MC, as the Russians are knocked out of the war, you have us, the Americans, entering.
Right.
The sleeping giant has awoken, and we are now putting troops on the field. Are we not?
No,
we're still in the training phase at the moment.
Yeah, we're away.
Yeah, remember what we said before, that like there was a great deal of time before we were even expecting you guys to fire a shot, because we want to get you all trained up and experienced and all this kind of stuff before we get you to face the enemy. You guys are still in that point. The Russian Federation is getting so desperate that they're even pulling out members of their version of an ROTC corps, so they're getting 16-year-old kids to start hitting the front lines.
The United States, while we're ramping up, we're nowhere near where we need to be. We are doing exactly like Farty is saying. We're in a training type of an environment.
Okay, but MC, maybe not ground forces, but when it comes to the Navy, we had the High Seas Fleet already, right? So we are...
The Atlantic Fleet. We don't call it the High Seas Fleet. That's a German term.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. The Atlantic Fleet. And we don't have to worry about a Pacific theater at this, in this war. So we are literally already doing convoys back and forth, right?
Right.
And
the convoy system has now been initiated, and material and goods are beginning to flow. There's now no the convoy system is becoming effective. The idea that you're going to be able to starve out the British fleet now is gone. The British fleet, with the American fleet now freed up for convoy duty, a lot of the British assets are being used and mobilized more along in the Mediterranean theater. They're starting to build up in the Mediterranean theater for some of that areas of the war. But at the same time, without the Russians there to stop the major forces, there's a great concern amongst the Allies. All right, that the Germans are going to initiate their counteroffensive before the American weight of material and men can tell. Okay, so they're really in a quandary, and you have several individuals, all right, on the English side that are very much pushing the ideas of the tanks. Now, the tanks have been used somewhat, right? But their usage was on the field of battle was how do we say this?
Minimalist.
Spotty, okay, but that is due to a number of factors. They were
Well,
never
and
used.
which tanks though? Are you talking about like the V1 tanks,
The
like the
Mark,
Land Sharks, like
the
the
Mark One.
old school?
Yeah, we're talking about the Mach ones. I mean, the World War One tanks. None of them World War One tanks were models of efficiency compared to what was going to come. Two
Well,
decades
no,
later.
and if you look at the theater of operation, what are you using a tank for when you have trench warfare? I mean,
That's
I
the
get
break.
it. Now you have like a bulletproof wall. I
Yeah,
get that,
it's
but
the
that's pretty
breaking
much
unit.
all it's for, right?
No, well, okay,
No.
you have a bulletproof wall that moves fast.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we laugh at the how fast things can go, like 5 or 6 miles an hour.
But
But
it was all by design.
have you ever tried to run 5 or 6 miles an hour constantly? You're moving at a good clip. You're
Yeah.
able to cover distance.
No, well, no, and you have a point because like even okay, so like you have the different sports like basketball. That's more of the long distance type of activity. But then you have people like me that were like I played baseball. That's short sprints.
Well,
That's all that is. I'm not going to be able to go 5-6 miles an hour for what 8 hours. That's
yeah,
not going to happen.
the chieftain, the bloke who does videos for wargaming and stuff like that, he's a technical advisor for like World of Tanks and stuff like that. Did a really good talk about the Sherman tank and how, even though it was obsolete in most cases, it was outmatched in quite a few cases when you're talking about Panthers and Tigers and stuff like that. It was the best tank for the time, and especially the best tank for the Americans because it did a lot of things. It could be transported by ships. It could operate in every weather. It was from the Urals all the way down to Southeast Asia. It worked everywhere. You could supply it, all the parts fit, and all this kind of stuff. Now you have a look at World War One tanks, and the rhomboidal design was all by design. They weren't supposed to move fast because they were supposed to support the infantry on an advance. They were designed like that so they could cross trenches and stuff like that. And the Germans figured out that, well, okay, our 9-foot trenches, these tanks can cross them, so let's make 12-foot trenches, which forced the British to make longer tanks. And in doing so, that opened up the German trenches to be more susceptible to artillery fire and things like that. The guns on the sponsons were designed so not so much to fire forwards, but to actually, once they started crossing trenches, they could turn sideways and fire down into the trenches and things like that. So a lot of things were designed to be specific to that particular battle at the time. Whether it worked absolutely perfectly or not, it's a completely different story, but that's the idea of it.
Right. The other thing about it was their usage in Flanders was marred because, quite frankly, the mud. So many of the tanks failed to get even off of the line of demarcation simply because the mud they would get stuck in the mud and you couldn't go forward.
That's if they didn't break down in the first place.
And the Germans, as a result, really, even though they came out initially as a surprise and they had the shock effect, surprise effect initially, the German high command had very little respect for the tanks. Right? They were like, there's these things are just majorly toys for the most part. Yeah, they can drive up here and there, all right, but for the most part they're a useless tool. All right. So this is the setting and the mentality of the setting that's going on. The Germans are still on the defensive. However, a number of things are already taking place. The two big heroes, all right, of the Germans, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, all right, are now been transferred, all right, from the east to the west. And they're preparing the ground for the German offensive, all right, because everybody knows that Russia is out of the war. So Ludendorff is now in command.
Okay, well, we'll get to the German offensive. We did have a whole conversation about what happened in Russia, and we did discuss Rasputin a little bit, but let's link up the timeline here. This is right around when Rasputin was killed, right?
No, Rasputin's already been dead. He's been dead for a while.
Okay, so the Tsar then, has he been kicked out of office?
He's abdicated. You had what's called the provisional government in charge. The provisional government wanted to continue the war, okay? but the agitation didn't end, all right, because the Bolsheviks wanted now to topple the provisional government, and they're in the process of doing that.
I just wanted everybody to know where we were. And what's up, Jensen? I see you in the chat. How you doing, buddy? Go ahead.
The communists are basically winning. They're toppling the government, and the reason the people are backing them is because the provisional government wouldn't sue for peace. The communists are promising to sue for peace.
It's not a situation like Germany at the end of World War I, where the public actually thought they were winning the war when they weren't. The Russians actually know that they're getting their ass kicked, right?
Well, I mean, they've got victories under their belts. The war is a meat grinder for their people, though. They realize that sending these troops forward, they're having victories against the Austrians, they're having victories against the Turks in most places, but overall against the Germans, when the Germans arrive, they're just dying in mass. Now they've stemmed a lot of that, but there's still a lot of corruption. Soldiers are not just dying because of the Germans; they're dying because of lack of food, because the logistics are beyond many of the officers, and the officers aren't caring for the troops. They are letting, during the winter, they had let a number of their soldiers just freeze to death, in the thousands. Okay, if you were a peasant and you got drafted into the Russian army, it was like a death sentence, and not just because of the Germans, not just because of the.
Well, and also you have Lenin running around causing mayhem all over the fucking entirety of Russia, right? Him and Stalin both are just jumping around causing fucking riots.
Well, they're in the major cities causing problems, but they're not to be honest, they were also doing that when the Tsar was in charge. Okay, so it isn't just that they were doing it with the Russian, they helped topple the Tsar. Okay, that now what they're doing is they're fighting against the provisional government in order to take it over and institute the Bolshevik Revolution.
So one other thing that is hardly ever mentioned is the Bolsheviks weren't just in Russia. I mean, they're all over different places getting involved where unionized works, working things. They were coming out as the workers' parties in lots of different countries, and they were back in the 1800s in England, even further back. They were over in America trying to stir up and get like the workers' parties and all this kind of shit. Started in America. We even had them out here in Australia. So they're basically just throwing out tenterhooks, trying to get massive support everywhere, and they finally got some success in Russia where they gained power.
Now, Lenin was actually delivered back to Russia via the Germans. The Germans had actually captured Lenin for his activities, and they had him in prison. And they were like, well, we don't like communists. Okay, well, what are we going to do with him? We could just kill him. Or if we send this asshole back to Russia, he could help us out. All right, so they in a special car, they ship him back to Russia to help destabilize the government, and it works.
That's an interesting story too, right? And by car, you mean a train car. How did they actually get him into Russia? Right? Like, explain that a little bit.
They were able to sit up there and get him to the front lines. And once you get to the front lines where people are, the craziness is going on, you basically sneak him aboard another train. Okay, that's like one of the last trains out. Like one of the last trains out of Atlanta, that kind of thing.
There's a lot of things that happen in time of war, and you'll find there's some fucking crazy shit happens. Like there's bribery and fucking spying and counterintelligence, and people actually talking to each other. So mainly all they had to do was figure out whereabouts in the line where a lot of these Bolsheviks were, and just sort of basically palm him off to him, sort of have a few discussions with the right kind of people in back channels and whatnot. Say, hey, listen, this car is going to come along, shoot everything but it. All right.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, let's talk about this. Because the Russia situation, I don't think enough people talk about it. Let's
well, I think we
okay,
need
so when
to be
you
honest,
look at it though, MC,
to be honest, we probably should just do a specific show just on the provisional government in Russia and the Bolshevik Revolution. That would probably be better.
okay, but I do want to bring up one last point then before
Sure.
you guys move on. The Russians actually were still trying to fight the war, and they had counselors put in, Bolsheviks, who would actually hold meetings with troops and officers to decide what to do. That's not how you fight a war, is it?
Well, no, but when you got a corrupt leadership behind it, they're just trying to find what's a good leader. You got to remember, I mean, when I say that these are peasants, these are peasants. They are told, here, you are now in the military. Obey your orders and march forward. I mean, that's the training they're being given.
It was just weird how they had actual, almost like staff meetings.
Well, but that was more toward the latter part when the Bolsheviks actually seized power more than anything else. But we'll talk about that too.
And go ahead and move forward, guys. The Russia thing is really interesting, and I don't think it's talked about enough. That's all.
Yeah, no, we definitely need to do an entire story dedicated just to that. But we'll do that at a later time. So we have the setup now. One of the things that the lieutenant colonel, who was, I can't remember his name, who on the British side, he was the one who came up with the idea of mass armor. All right, and he's the one who's talking to French to say, look, General French, we can do this. We just can't do it. Now, French was initially saying no. I saw what their actions were, that they failed in Flanders, and he was like, no. We don't want Flanders. We want to hit a point that's not mud. All right, and it's basically solid ground where these things can move, and we can initiate a breakthrough. And
the Hindenburg Line at this point was basically almost left alone for the large majority of the war, which did lead itself to it wasn't a moonscape, it wasn't a quagmire at the time, and all this kind of stuff, and it was almost the perfect place to start using tanks at.
It was a very much a strong point. The Germans had, and as a result, it was considered a quiet sector. And what's even worse for the Germans was the fact that the positioning allowed for the massing of the tanks. The tanks could be mobilized in mass, and no one could stop them from doing that. I mean, they wouldn't see it coming.
They could literally bring them up in like long trains of flatbed cars and stuff like that. Get them off the trains, move them up to an advanced point, mobilise them, get them all organised, and then when the order's given to go, once they break cover, that's the first time the Germans are going to know that they're there.
Yeah, go ahead and show my screen, Sparty. This is them getting ready for this advancement. All right, you can see a lot of the tanks. All right, and they're able to bring these things in. Now they're not hiding them anymore, whereas before they used to put them under tarps so that the enemy didn't see them back in 1916. Now that the Germans know what they are, they don't care, but they're now being able to mass them and move them rapidly into the front lines. So they're preparing for this. And of course you've got these bundles of sticks, because these bundles of sticks are going to make up for these longer trench lines that they've created.
Fascines.
Yeah. So they're going to drop these into the trench as they get forward, as they get to it, and then they're going to use those as just basically part of the roadway to go over it. And it's very effective.
Yeah. Now, those things are a one-shot deal. If you do run a couple of tanks over them, you'll basically ruin them. But the point is, the first tank will drop his, move to the other side. The next tank can keep his, and then when you get to the next line of trenches, then you'll have another one to drop in the trenches, and then the third line of trenches, the third lot of tanks that didn't have to use theirs, and the first two lots of trenches will continue to drop theirs.
Okay, so let's go to the first map. This is the first map. What you're seeing now is what the mass of the massing of the troops and the massing of the tank units. You want to go ahead and party?
Well, here, this is basically the starting point. They'll move off and they'll cut about 350 odd trails through barbed wire defences and all this kind of stuff. A few other instances that we can touch on too is that this is also, as I've mentioned before, the first use of proper combined arms. And it's not just the tanks that are going to be used. There's aircraft that are going to be used in conjunction with smoke screens. There's zero ranging, which is before what you'd do is you'd fire a few marking rounds until you actually hit the target, and then you'd do what's called fire for effect, which is open up with all your guns. What they were doing was they were trying to use a lot of trigonometry and very, very complicated mathematics to try and see if they could get the first round on target and fire for effect right from the word go, because the Germans were sort of figuring out with these marking rounds, oh, there's an artillery barrage coming, right, everyone take cover. But if you do zero ranging and you fire for effect on the trenches initially, well, there's no warning to it. They were also using massed walking fire, which, as we've seen in the last episode, they'd started learning that if we started walking the fire in a walking barrage, put a barrage in front of the troops as they're moving forward, it basically clears the way for the troops. Another thing that they're also using, and we mentioned this before about the fragmentation shells not doing anything to the barbed wire. The other end of it was the other types of shells that they were using were burying themselves into the ground. Now that's all great and groovy when you're talking about trying to hit trenches and stuff like that, because they bury themselves in the ground, they detonate below the ground and fill in trenches and whatnot. But they still weren't doing anything to the barbed wire. By this time, they'd invented the 601 fuse, the 106 fuse. And this was an instantaneous fuse. So as soon as it hit something, the fuse was in the nose of the shell. And as soon as it hit something like a rock or dirt or anything like that, it'd detonate with the explosive portion slightly above the ground. And this was very much effective in trying to cut barbed wire. Then you couple that with the tanks that were crushing what barbed wire was left, and some of them had grappling hooks to, as they were moving along, whatever was left was being dragged along and pulled into large bundles and stuff off to the sides, and they were opening up these nice clean entry points for troops and supposedly cavalry and stuff to move in behind them unencumbered. So there's a lot of other things that they were utilizing just as well as the tanks.
The idea was the tanks would be used to blow open a hole, and then once that hole has been achieved, they were 5 cavalry divisions that were supposed to rush forward and to take advantage of this and continue the advance and continue and roll up this entire line, causing a general retreat along the entire line. That's what the plan was. Okay, now you'll notice they only had 1 infantry. They had 5 cavalry divisions to roll up, but the one thing that they didn't have is they didn't have a corps of infantry to do follow-up. And this is going to come back to bite them later, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea is to use the cavalry to blow open a hole, all right? And you ready for the next? Yep. Okay, let me get to that now. All right, here's the starting line, and which is what you were seeing before, and this is the kickoff.
And this is a 9-mile 9-mile front that moved 5 miles in advance.
This is the first few hours of this advance. You can see this is the original line. This is the push. Now, the push is very successful, except for up here. All right. But overall, they're able to push this line all the way back. The Second Army is in full retreat. In the first couple of hours, they take 9,000, I think it's 9,000 or 8,000 German prisoners. All right. It's just a general rout.
And the advancing forces did take about 2,000 casualties in this action. But when you consider things, that was pretty small.
Well, no, that was really small, actually, considering the amount of numbers we've talked about in past episodes. That is really small.
Now,
but looking at this map, you know what I'm seeing, and maybe I'm wrong, but this reminds me of Bastogne. This looks like the Battle of the Bulge.
In a way, it is. It's very similar. The English had amassed 436 tanks. All right, of which the majority of 383 were armed.
Yep.
Were equipped with weapons. All right.
Yeah.
The other tanks were just basically there to use as moving shields. All right, to support the infantry. All right, and to support the advance. All right, and like I said, they moved this far. This is the first line in approximately 4.5 hours. They kicked off at 6 o'clock, 6:20 a.m. They did not use an advanced artillery barrage. They just opened fire and started moving forward. They completely caught the Germans by surprise. They also, believe it or not, they're still using chemical weapons, and they're using poison gas shells and everything in this attack and all this movement. So, I mean, I don't want people to forget that the World War I was heavy use of poison gas, and they use it here as well. All right, and of course, the idea is to, with the gas is basically to scare the enemy, to cause them to run away. You add that to the mass movement of the tanks. And the other thing about this that is shocking to the Germans is this is their line's strong point. All right. And it collapsed. Their strong point in the line has collapsed, and they're shocked. Ludendorff is, okay, we have to retreat. He was going to pull back the entire, both sides of this entire line, thinking he couldn't stop this. That was his initial reaction. And it's later on, the German officers and his staff, explained to him the weaknesses that happened. Because while this looks really good, and it is, okay, there are problems. You want to go into those, 40?
Well, real quick, I'm once again looking at the map. If I'm gonna pull back, the line from Cambrai to Cambrai to whatever the fuck, not Boulogne, but the other one. So I'm gonna draw the line all the way back. I'm gonna stabilize my line, and I'm gonna go full artillery barrage on the fucking British. Yeah, I'm going to blow the shit out of them.
Hold on a second. I want you to understand what you're looking at. This is a 5-mile deep salient.
Yeah.
Okay? They have overrun all that artillery, the German artillery in this region.
Oh, really? So you're going to have to bring up more artillery from the train lines.
You're going to have to redeploy units. You're going to have to. That's how devastating this attack was.
What about my idea, though? Look at the map. Cambrai all the way over to Itchy and Antrius.
No, they're gonna,
let's do the line right through there.
If they allow this area becomes untenable. They're going to have to do a general retreat along these lines and probably pull back another 20, 30 miles.
Well, they did kind of have this that kind of a thing. where troops can readily retreat to, because there's supply trenches and support trenches and secondary defensive trenches and stuff like that behind these lines. Now, a lot of those had been taken in this 5 mile advance, but it's very, very difficult as like say a division commander to, by the time you figured out that most of your guys have like gone from, oh, this is pretty much a holiday, to holy shit, where'd these tanks come from? And they start running. You've now got to try and source out your regiment commanders, your battalion commanders, your company commanders, and all this kind of stuff, and then try and quell this mass retreat, and then organise these guys to try and, okay, right, we'll rendezvous at this point and then regroup. And doing that's a very, very slow sort of process, and when you're talking about an advance this quick, and some of the instances that that we basically learnt in this was that we can't use tanks inside of towns. This is where the Germans did have some slight successes in this advance, and because of the previous attacks with tanks, the Germans had actually figured out, well, we might need to start using some anti-tank units, and they did do that. And there was one anti-tank unit that was, there was one particular fellow in it by the name of Unterfitzer Kruger, and he was in one of these anti-tank units, and it was at bloody, what's that fucking joint called?
Fifth Squares.
Yeah, for squares, where this one individual, Unter, had taken out the large majority of the 39 tanks that were knocked out there, and that was mainly because he was a specific anti-tank unit with an anti-tank gun, or an early version of a direct fire weapon. And the reason why he gets a mention is because he's got the very rare accomplishment of being one of the only people from the enemy side to ever get mentioned in British dispatches. And if you get mentioned in a dispatch, you're a somebody. So it's quite a feat when we recognise the enemy like that.
Of course, he got that wonderful dubious honor posthumously, but
That's correct. Yep. He kept firing until basically he was shot.
All right. So this hasn't all been a great success, but overall it has. Now, what happens? Well, now the British, the British tank corps and the British tank command, they're all elated. They're so elated that they only issue orders for the advance to take place for the cavalry units. Now that the breakthrough has happened, to push through, they only give it to one of the 5 cavalry divisions, all right, to tell them to advance. And it happens to be the one cavalry division that's supposed to advance along this line.
Well, right. No, and don't the Germans turn around and start using gas again?
Well, once again, when you overrun an area this large, okay, this area is denuded of response. You're going to have to build up and bring in units. They're not prepared for this.
I know they're not prepared, but I swear I thought reading about this that the Germans turned around and in desperation used gas again.
No,
am I wrong?
They do use gas in the counterattack, but that's a ways away yet. This is day 1. All right, that isn't the counteroffensive begins on day 8.
This offensive basically makes the Germans pull a full division from the Russian front over to counterattack,
which shows you something else. All right, the Germans are able to move units around fairly quickly, well, relatively quickly, I should say. All right,
for the time.
Right, for the time. Now, this is also a problem area right here, and this is the Bourlon Forest. Okay, guess what tanks can't do at this stage? They can't really go through heavily wooded areas. All right, and once again, remember, there was only a single infantry division that was coordinated in this attack. All right, and as a result, this forest becomes a death trap because the cavalry unit that's trying to advance through this area and take advantage of it, all right, is stymied because of a number of problems, all right. And the other cavalry units that were supposed to advance with them to punch through, to actually break through even further through here and take advantage of this wide open spaces, were delayed all right, before they were told to go. And when they finally were told to go, they all went along this roadway here, which slowed the entire advance, all right, and basically killed any way of really getting the breakthrough. And this is what saves the Germans from having to do a general retreat initially. Because it's wonderful to try and say, okay, pull these units back. But if the enemy cavalry units have already swept through this area, and they could have, what good would it have done to have said, okay, pull back to Cadre when that area was already gone?
Another issue that was at Boulogne Ridge it wasn't just a forest, but it was also a high point. And the Germans were able to fire down onto the advancing forces. And it did also reinforce another weakness with the tanks. And they'd found, because they'd moved so slowly, that any Germans that could get on top of these tanks basically owned the tank. There were ports on top of the tank where they could drop grenades into. Once a German had gotten on top of that tank, there was nothing stopping him then. They weren't prepared for people climbing up on tanks, and there are photos of where there's a framework, and we did mention this in the tank special that we did several months ago, where it looked like basically a roof with chicken wire on it, and that was basically to prevent people from throwing grenades up onto the roof or getting up onto the roof and all this kind of stuff. But once they were there wasn't really much that could be done about it. Basically, the tank was dead at that point. And when firing down onto the tanks, the British had found that their arc of fire could not fire up high enough. So you're at the bottom of a ridge, everyone's firing down onto you, and typically, even back in that point there, tanks usually did have more armour in the front, some armour on the sides, and not very much on the rear and the roof, because you weren't supposed to be firing at the back or on the roof. They did have fairly decent armour underneath, because they were supposed to be traversing trenches where people could fire back up at them, so that was fairly well protected. And even today, the armour scheme pretty much is the same. Most of the armour's at the front, quite a bit of it's at the sides, not so much at the rear. That's mainly also why engines have their own separate compartment as the rear, because engines are sort of considered as armour as well. But if you fire down onto a tank, even nowadays, that's usually considered partially the most weakest part, and you can see that with a lot of modern weapons nowadays, where they've got a top-down attack, where instead of hitting the front of the armour or the side, they're designed to sail over the top of the tank and literally detonate downwards. So this is the thing that they encountered there.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. In World War I, okay, so they're going in from the top down. In World War II, you had stuff like sticky bombs, right? Axle grease wrapped around a grenade, pretty much. And you just stick it to the wheel well.
Well, an actual sticky bomb, like you're thinking of the improvised sticky bomb from Saving Private Ryan, but there actually was a purpose-made hand grenade device that looked like a big softball on a stick, and you'd peel off this cover, and it's like big sticky glue, and you're supposed to throw it against a tank. But the problem with a sticky bomb is typically you have to be ridiculously close, or unnervingly close to a tank to actually make it work.
Yeah, it's
and
not
a lot
like
of people didn't like using it.
Shoot at you.
Yeah.
Well, if you're using those devices, it's because you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, let's be honest. The other part of the lightly armored tank, of course, is underneath. All right, so if the tank rolls over the top of you, and you're able to put a bomb, doing the old Luke Skywalker thing.
Okay, well, here's the thing, though, MC. Okay, so like in World War II, we had RPGs, right? So you had the bazooka. You could actually fire that at the track and disarm the tank. We didn't have that in World War I. Okay. What were they doing?
Okay. You could dislodge the tread, and that then the tank and the crew were still fine. They became the pillbox then. Okay, that was one of the problems. Is it disabled the tank, but it didn't take the tank out necessarily. Now it did stop its mobility, which is a key factor for it, and you could bring in artillery. Call in artillery to finish it off. All right, made it a lot easier at that point. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, tanks at this point were basically glorified armored cars. We've got less than 10 millimeters of armor, and they're really designed to stop rifle bullets and stuff like that. And it's by the end of the war where they realised, well, cannons, like even howitzers and normal field guns, rip tanks completely open, like to pieces. And this is where you get the upgrading of the armor to try and start, stopping things like 50 caliber rounds. Like by World War II, they were still using things like the Boys anti-tank rifle, which was a 55 caliber, like sort of the slightly bigger 50 BMG round, and they were still effective to punch through some armor, but they weren't destroying tanks. You were sniping the driver, you were hitting the commander, and things like that. And then as armor started getting better, you had your 37 millimeter guns, which then became obsolete during World War II, and then you started using your 75 millimeter guns, and armor kept on increasing. There's always been a thing of armor defeats your weapons. You build bigger weapons to defeat the armor. You build better armor to defeat the weapons, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And it's just different types of weapons that have been introduced, say with the World War II bazooka, where you're not trying to use kinetic energy or a massive amount of explosive to do the damage. You're using what's called a shape charge. And a shape charge, the benefit of that is if you can deploy it correctly and it goes off with its proper standoff distance, it'll just basically shoot a thing of super hot copper straight through the armor and basically melt through the armor. And in that, you don't need the velocity, you don't need kinetic energy, you don't need brute explosive force. You're utilizing the explosive to do one very, very specific thing, and it doesn't matter how hard you hit it. So that's the difference between hitting it with a cannon and hitting it with, say, an RPG or a bazooka.
Yeah, Farty, go ahead and show the picture. All right, this is a tank called the Deborah. Okay. This was a tank that fought in this battle. All right. It is one of the tanks that was part of that area where the 39 tanks that Farty was mentioning, all right, got hit. And you can see, all right, this is the front of the tank. It got hit with an artillery. It got hit with an artillery shell.
That's the back of it.
All right, the back of it. All right. Well, it got hit with an artillery shell. All right. It killed the people in the back, and the commander who was up front, I guess, him and the driver, they both survived this hit. And in fact, it was the driver who wanted to find his tank. Right. So he went looking for this. They actually went back in 1990s, right, to go try and discover where their tank was from World War I in order to bring it back. That this is what they're talking about. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the other picture that shows the other side of this. The other side of this tank is just completely mauled. All right, because
I put it up there.
No, you did. I just didn't copy it over, so it's my fault. All right, it's my fault, Farty.
You had one job, MC. One job. God damn it.
Well, I mean, it's my fault for doing it. But this is what they were moving with. Now, like
real quick. This doesn't even have anything to do with World War I. Eldritch God just wrote me a DM. Dude, I know you don't give a shit about the coronavirus nonsense, but my medical contacts just gave me a heads up. We got military units rolling into northern Cali and Washington. He expects these locations will be on lockdown by midnight West Coast time. Expect the whole West Coast to wind up in lockdown for the next few days. I trust this guy. I'm fairly certain he's not shitting me.
Good. I hope we fucking learn and do the same thing to South Australia.
No, I'm flying out in a week, dude. No, this isn't good.
Just relax. We'll see what they're actually doing. I do know that the state of Washington has declared a coronavirus emergency. All right, so it could be something along those lines. I don't know if they're rolling into Cali or anything like that. I think what he may be seeing or what they may be talking about could be the actions they're taking in the state of Washington. Yeah, there's a concern there. All right, first of all, in the state of Washington, so I realize we're kind of getting off topic here. The state of Washington had the first U.S. death, All right. But in addition to that, the state of Washington also had an individual who had gotten sick, thought that they were getting better, and he went back to high school. So it's very possible the entire high school has been exposed at least, and who knows how widespread it could go. So it could be something that they're trying to lock this stuff down and prevent it from, just in that one small area.
Getting the resources ready just in case of.
Right. What you're doing is you're pre-planning movement more than anything else. I don't think that the military has been called up. At least I haven't heard of any of the units, any of the National Guard units being activated. And it will be the National Guard units that get activated, all right, to do this. It will not be the U.S. military forces like the standard, like in Washington. The closest thing they have is Fort Lewis in Washington. But that's a ranger unit. They are not going to use a ranger unit to patrol. They just aren't. It's a waste resources.
You're not going to use a jackhammer to do what you can do with a scalpel.
Well, let's put it this way. Eldritch is asking me if I have enough food in my house, as in bug out bags and shit. He's nervous about it, and I know Eldritch. He's a smart man. If he's nervous, I'm nervous. You know what I mean?
I don't. But bug out bag isn't going to help you. What you really want to do is, if you want to do something, is buy enough canned foodstuffs and non-perishable foodstuffs to survive in your house. All right, for a couple of weeks. Make sure you have an extra water online. All right, that you've laid out. All right, it can be just, if you want, just fill up some containers, some old milk jugs that you've cleaned out with water, and have them available just in case as well. But for the most part, I doubt that even that'll be necessary as far as water goes. But as far as food goes, if you get a couple of weeks of canned foods and other non-perishable food stuff, like some large bags of rice, some large bags of flour. All right, like five pound bags of flour where you can make your own bread, make your own food. Then you're okay. That's what this is going to turn into. I wouldn't try and put a bug out bag and try to run, because if you try to run,
you'll run into it. Try actually not to use milk jugs if you can, because no matter how hard you wash them out and all this kind of stuff, there's something about the plastic that they use. If you've ever tried to use a milk bottle, an old milk bottle as a water bottle, like during especially like the summertime, it'll just make you fucking sick. So use Coke bottles and stuff like that instead.
Well, yeah, the same principle, but yeah, okay, that's fine. Same principle applies. So just some.
Well, no, and you guys go ahead and hey, we can sidetrack if you guys want. Captain Colepile's in the chat. He said dried beans. Yeah, beans, rice. Absolutely, man. Bottled water. I'm on a well here personally, but if the power goes out, our well goes out, right? So bottled water. It rains a lot in Oregon, so we can catch rainwater here. There's that. I don't know. Just be prepared and go ahead and go back to the World War I thing. I know we only got 15, 20 minutes left. Go ahead, guys. Sorry.
Well, just real quick, if you use the rainwater, don't forget, you'll be just getting all the diluted chemtrails that make the freaking frogs gay, and you'll be a gay frog. Anyway, continue.
Okay. And now we were talking about this for the Warlawn Forest, all right? But what you're seeing here, you'll notice how nice and smooth this is. The reason for that is by the end of the first day, the tanks had gotten exactly, for the most part, right, with the exception of they were actually supposed to go all the way through here. They had already achieved what they expected to achieve with the breakout. They were in their breakout points. They had gone through it. Now, here's the problem. The Highlanders here, all right, this area here was doing exactly what Farty was saying, which is they were able to dominate with artillery these other units, and tanks were being knocked out, all right? They were being destroyed. Okay, you already had enough problems with the tanks. After the first day, half the tanks were non-operational. All right, it's just the way that the reliability of the tanks were not great at this point. All right, but they had achieved this major breakthrough. The follow-up punch line with the follow-up punch of the cavalry units had basically stalled. They couldn't go anywhere. There was not enough infantry to provide cover. Okay, and once again, and Fardy had mentioned this, one of the problems with the tanks was that they didn't have internal communications. These tanks didn't have radios internally. All right, so once again, the communications back to headquarters on what they could do, how they could rearrange things, wasn't there. All right, the Highlanders, the Scottish Highlanders, were assigned this portion, and they were so close that they continued to attack, taking heavy casualties. All right, until they took this area.
That's where most of the 2,000 casualties was actually incurred.
Now at Fesquez is what was being bombarded. This is where the artillery was happening. This is where they had lost. They lost 39 tanks due to enemy action right here, right in this one small little area. Right, and as you can see, it comes from the artillery that was brought in, and they were just using indirect fire, and they were just hammering it. Okay, so overall now the Germans basically are able to block the cavalry units from coming in. Okay, so this whole thing is a great success. At this point in time, it's been reported as a great success. And back in England, church bells are ringing.
For the first time in 4 years.
The Germans, however, don't sit idly by. Okay? Now, this is the San Quentin Canal. The Germans had blown up all the bridges along this canal, which was one of the reasons why the cavalry units couldn't disperse, because they couldn't just easily get across this canal. All right? It delayed the entire... And you can see how deep it is. These are people. There's a guy here walking. This is a guy standing in the canal. All right, so this is not an insignificant, just little ditch to get across. You can see how trying to get like a horse through this would be quite difficult. Right.
And remember too, you had to send engineers down there to actually build those bridges too. So yeah, not a lot of love gets given to the engineers, but that's kind of the shit that they have to do.
Right, so the entire breakthrough stalls. At the cusp of victory, the entire breakthrough has stalled. The Germans now begin their counterattack. And the counterattack basically will push, all right, the counterattack begins on November 30th, right? This attack began on November 21st. All right, November 30th, the counterattack begins. Now, the Germans, they've been learning new techniques of war. And one of the techniques that is really tough mentally on the German high command, but has been forced on them because of reality, is the use of these stormtroopers. Now, the idea of the stormtroopers isn't the Star Wars idea of stormtroopers, okay? Where the guys are just marching, in nice little white suits, okay? The idea of stormtroopers were a core unit acting like an elite unit, right, which would infiltrate into the back of the into the back lines, right, and then punch through. They're like special forces units, right, to punch an area. And the reason that this is so difficult for the command to accept is because these are independent units. They're acting on their own. So they're leaving the entire initiative up to the local unit commanders. They're making the decisions on the ground. This is contrary to how war has been fought up to now. But they've learned that in the Italy campaign that these units can be extraordinarily effective. When you hit a hard point, you send in one of these units behind the lines, all right, to disrupt their communications so you can overcome that strong point or bypass it. and they utilize these tactics to great effect. In a sense, what's happening now is the idea of mobile warfare is beginning to return. The idea of being stuck in this trench warfare and how to go bypass these trenches with these elite units to blow open small little holes that the rest of the army would then funnel through in multiple areas, and how effective these small unit tactics can work. But it's not something that the commands naturally gravitate towards, because they want to be in total control of everything. This is what they've been taught. Even in the Civil War, the lieutenant wasn't making decisions on his own. All right. Even the colonels generally weren't making decisions on their own. They were just making sure that everybody within their field of responsibility does what the general tells them.
These guys are basically their rationale is no prisoners. They're just going in, they're killing everything and all this, and seeing how far they get. They've got early forms of submachine guns. They're pistols and stuff like that. They've got lots of grenades on them. There's lots of ammunition. They're armed to the teeth. They've got fighting knives, big fucking knives with bloody knuckle dusters and spikes and shit on them. Even hammers and axes and basically anything that'll kill somebody. They're basically carrying on them, and even to the point where they've got early forms of body armor and rudimentary body armor. This is still steel plate with sort of early ballistic material, very heavy cotton and stuff like that behind it. It's not completely effective, but like if you're in a trench and someone tries to bayonet you or something like that, you'll mostly get a glancing blow off the metal plate. Someone shoots you with a pistol, you might stop it, but it gives them that bit of an edge, and becomes the ungentlemanly war type of thing where with the no prisoners aspect, they're killing officers. They're trying to get to the higher ranks and all this kind of stuff to really disrupt your enemy forces and whatnot. And these guys are coming in from flanks. They're not part of main attacks. They're also being utilised when we do an advance. These are the guys that we usually met with on the other side. They're the guys that are coming back to retake their own positions and stuff like that. So once you've been mauled on the advance, your partial troops that are there and trying to take these trenches are being depleted by these guys that are coming in. They're well supported and they're well armed, and you're really not expecting them right at first. Up until this point here, we are sort of expecting them, but still, they're their own version of tanks. Fucking scary.
The other thing about the counteroffensive is that it's being initiated the same way the British did. No advance warning. They just started doing walk-in artillery. They included poison gas shells, all right, to blanket areas as they started moving the offensive forward. And basically,
what was the gas, if I may ask?
Mustard gas.
Yeah, phosgene, Blue Cross mustard.
It was mustard gas, so it scorches the skin. It damages the lungs, right?
Right. It's a blister agent. If it gets into your lungs, basically it causes the lungs to basically fill with fluid because it's a blister agent.
Yeah.
And you basically, if you get it in your lungs, you basically die. You can basically die simply from drowning in your own fluids.
What do you need? You need the mask, the quick mask that they had, right? Bam. Could you use a scarf?
Nope.
No.
Scarf wasn't going to work, and what's worse is this gas could easily blind you.
Yeah, and the initially there was a bit of a wives' tale about if you urinated on a mask and put it over your face, that was supposed to, the ammonia in it was supposed to counteract the mustard gas, but all that did was just give you a face full of ammonia and mustard gas at the same time. Right.
Well, because that comes from, it was effective against chlorine gas, right? Which is what they started with. No, right? It did work with the chlorine stuff, but it doesn't work with mustard gas, right? That's where that old wives' tale came about. It had some validity initially, all right, that people were doing that for. But of course, when that's all you know, as they change, poison gases, they tried several different types of poison gas, but the most effective, of course, was mustard gas. But it's also the most debilitating and so forth. And it burns the skin. It is what blackens the skin, right? Because basically your skin blisters. from it.
In a lot of cases too, though, they had started issuing gas masks and things like that to the British troops. But the problem is, and this is where we typically will use an MBC suit, is that, well, the blister agent still gets on your skin. And when they're wearing the heavy wool twill uniforms of the old battle dress uniform, all you're doing is basically soaking up a lot of this gas and it's condensing into the material and sticking there.
But Farty and MC, both of you, you guys are the military guys here. I'm not. What's worse, sarin or mustard?
As far as what?
Survival rate.
Oh, the mustard. There's a lot, what you can do to survive mustard gas, but in the effects that it has on your skin, your eyes, and all this kind of stuff, it's extremely painful and excruciating and all this kind of stuff. And if you do survive, you've got to put up with that aspect of it. Sarin can, depending on the concentrations, can kill you quite quickly. So as far as suffering goes,
sarin can be bad because even if it doesn't kill you, it can irreparably harm your nervous system. All right. However, sarin is not, when you say what's worse, okay, the spread of sarin is much more difficult. Mustard gas is actually much easier to deploy. All right, it has a lot more persistence. All right, for an area, it has so from that perspective, it's got a lot of advantages. It is a blister agent. Yes, it is less lethal. All right, in the concentrations per se. But then again, you can be horribly disfigured. There's people that came back. Of course, you see the people who got hit with gas attacks. Their whole face, half their face, they look like Two-Face. That kind of stuff happened. Whereas with sarin, you would just die. All right. So, but at the same time, sarin, even if you survive, your nervous system may be totally wrecked. You may have shakes. You may not be able to pick up things anymore if it gets into certain areas of your brain. You may have trouble walking. You may always have a speech impediment as a result. Okay, so gas, sarin, both sarin and mustard are a horrible device. Horrible system to actually horrible to the body. Okay, and they can have long-term, and they both can have long-term effects.
This is part of the reason why the chemical agents are supposed to be banned pretty much, because they're an inhumane weapon.
Well, no, and there is that point because you have this counterattack. You have the Germans deploying gas on a very large level, actually. You hadn't seen this since their first attacks, right? Where the gas attack went horribly wrong and the wind changed.
Yeah, but that was
right back in their face.
That was not the Germans, though. That was the British.
Yeah.
That was the British, but you have it at that type of scale, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, at this point, gas is now part of the war. I hate to say it, but at this point in time, gas is not part of the war.
And it
will be used in every attack. It will be used in every, it won't be used strictly everywhere, but there will be an area when an attack happens that will use poison gas.
And they've got a lot more efficient in how they use it too. Is that instance where the British got to blow back on their faces, they were using what's called projectors, which are basically fog machines pretty much, and just hope that the wind would just carry it off to the enemy. Now you've got it in shells, you've got it in command detonation devices and things like that, where you can actually throw it at the enemy at a safe distance and have it do its effect there.
The other devastating thing about phosgene or mustard gas is the fact that it's heavier than air.
So it sinks down into the shell craters and stuff like that. So you go take cover, you're getting a big concentration of it.
It sinks into the trenches.
They weren't using white phosphorus back then, though, right? That didn't come until Korea and Vietnam, correct?
Well, white phosphorus is the purpose of white phosphorus is limited. Right? It depends on what you're trying to use it for. They have white phosphorus. They use it as star shells for the most part to illuminate areas. But what are you trying to use the phosphorus for? The white phosphorus for?
You're using it as napalm, MC. You know damn right.
But they don't use it as napalm. That is not how they actually utilize it.
Are you telling me the Israelis didn't do that in Palestine?
No, they did not use it like that in Palestine. That's nonsense. That's a freaking wise tale. The grenades that they had for white phosphorus were for tunnel dug-in points. Is when they were basically being used as an anti-personnel weapon. Okay, is if you were trying to go into those points. It didn't mean that white phosphorus didn't have other uses, but they were trying to burn something. They were trying to create something to burn. The uses of white phosphorus are very limited, all right, for what you're trying to do. For example, a place to try to use white phosphorus shell would be against an ammunition dump. Okay, you're trying to, it's a concentration of forces. You're trying to light the ammunition or a fuel depot on fire. All right. Another place that they use white phosphorus grenades specifically were in tunnels. All right. If the enemy was in a tunnel, dugout tunnel, then they throw the white phosphorus in there for a couple of reasons. One, it was a devastating weapon in and of itself, right? And everyone, let's be honest, mankind has a natural, just like every other animal on the planet, has a natural fear of fire. All right. And number two is exactly what Swarty was talking about. In a tunnel, the one thing that's very limited is oxygen. And you suck up all the oxygen out of the area, you can kill people simply because they suffocate without being able to breathe, because there's not enough oxygen in the air, because it's been pulled up by the white phosphorus. It's been used up. And that's one of the tactics that they use specifically in Vietnam, is they would put Willie P down both sides of a spider hole, all right, in an attempt to do
They did that before the tunnel rats would drop in, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what they do. Yeah, now, of course, the enemy learned how to mitigate against some of that stuff, but still, that's what the purpose was.
But that's also what the use of a thermobaric, especially the bunker busters, are nowadays. Is the thermobaric weapon does basically exactly the same thing. But another use that they usually use for Willie Pete for is a marking round, especially with aircraft nowadays, because it's this big white plume of smoke, and well, okay, hit that thing.
Yeah, that's something else that it does. White phosphorus is used to generate smoke, all right, and it can do that in large quantities with a minimal amount of material. Now, one of the reasons that everyone got upset about the use of white phosphorus has absolutely nothing to do with what it did to troops. The reason they got upset was because if you received shrapnel of white phosphorus in your body, it would sit in your body until it's exposed to air, at which point, if somebody in the surgery group, all right, is working on you, as soon as they get to that point where, okay, we see this shell fragment, as soon as they open that shell fragment up to air, it would detonate. Well,
no. Let's go back to the gas attack in World War I in this battle. Okay. So you fire gas over. You're now a triage medical personnel, right? How are you dealing with this gas attack?
Effectively, you basically, all you can really do is try and irrigate the injury to try and get as much of it off the person as you possibly can, dilute it to a stage where it's ceasing to become a corrosive agent anymore. And in a lot of the cases, the guys, when they get hit with this stuff, by the time they get back to the first aid posts and all this kind of stuff, the damage is already done.
From an internal
and water
perspective,
doesn't necessarily work, right? I thought mustard gas, water actually reacted bad with it. Am I wrong?
No, well, I mean, how much water do you have is the question. How fast can you dilute the entire area? All right, as long as you can spray the person down in a hose and really, really wash them good. No, it's very effective. All right, but
okay. I thought it actually had an adverse reaction to water.
Well, it does, but it does to a point. All right, but if you get enough water to dilute it, it'll counteract it effectively, quickly enough that the damage is not done. Now, if you just have a canteen, that's all the water you got, then no, that's not going to be very effective. That's going to make things worse.
Okay.
But if you got a hose, you can hose people down, then they're good to go.
Yeah, that's the term, irrigating the wound. It's not just like drop a couple of drops of water. You're actually, like, say, for instance, a burn. You're running it under a tap for 10 minutes and stuff like that. You're irrigating the wound. Using lots and lots
like
of water.
In an industrial situation, if you get something like metal flakes in your eye, you rinse it out. And by rinse it out, you're like pouring water into your damn eyeball for like 10 minutes straight.
Well, you're going to an eye wash station where it's being shot up into your eyes and all this. So, like anything that falls out, you typically sort of follow the path of the water and drop away with it. Yeah, that's basically the same. The same premise. Yeah, it's the same
Okay,
with like
well,
most.
go ahead then, guys. Go ahead and continue. So the gas attack fires off. The Germans are making a push. They fail, don't they?
No, they don't.
Nope, they succeed.
They're overall, it's a success in that they pushed them basically all the way back to the starting line.
Yep.
This whole salient basically collapses. Now it's a grinding fight. It is coming from lessons learned, and the main reason that they can't throw more into it is right now the Germans just don't have the reserve forces to do anything more than just do a localized counterattack. They haven't gotten all their troops off the Eastern Front yet.
You know what, MC and Farty, both of you, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
For real, this war has been dragging on for what, 3 years now?
Mm-hmm.
How much of the population of the men of the fighting population are left in Germany?
It is denuding the fighting population in Germany. They are now starting to have problems, but even worse, the French male contingent has dropped by about 20%.
There is another aspect that a lot of people don't talk about too, but we did mention this with Flanders, where there was a reporter that was able to go onto the front lines. He was completely unvetted and uncensored and all this, and he sent back some no holes barred, no beg your pardons reports back to the Britain. People starting to read this in the papers, and they've figured out, oh, hang on, this isn't the big adventure we initially thought it was. This is really, really, really bad. And then the suffragette movement and things like that start forming, and there is some dissent in the British public to start saying, well, why are we over there fighting that war for them and killing all of our boys? And this does happen in Australia as well. And there is a push to start sort of downsizing the war, which isn't, it doesn't work, because we'll still go on to win this, and pump more and more forces in, especially when the Americans come along.
That's kind of interesting. So what you're saying is there is a push on the home front to end the war as soon as you call us, and I hate this term, but whatever, we'll roll with it. The Yanks actually show up ready to fight, and you guys are about ready to give up.
Well, not ready to give up.
The British are not ready to give up. The French are close, all right, to suing for peace, and the Russians are basically in the process of suing for peace.
Yeah, but the British aren't ready to give up yet. Like I said, they'll still go on. They're still committed and all this kind of stuff. But the attitude back at the beginning of go do your thing for your country, go on this big adventure, be a man among men, and all this kind of stuff is sort of starting to turn.
The other aspect of this, of course, is while the Allies are struggling in the Western theater, and this is where the majority of the forces are, granted, they're having success against the Turks. They're having success in other theaters. This is a world war. Okay, so while right across the channel they're stuck, in other areas like Mesopotamia, in Arab, the Arab regions, they're winning.
And that's basically what's going to save the British from actually, going full on hippie on this, is that the arguments to bring the troops back will be countered with, but we just made the success here and we're making a push there, and look at Cambrai, look at that, look, we ring the church bells, and that'll keep them quiet enough to allow the British to continue this on.
Well, okay, here's another question. Winston Churchill is about to come back into the forefront, correct?
Mm-hmm.
When is that? Is that this battle? I know he was, the Admiral of the Navy to begin with, and then he goes into the General of the Army position, correct?
I don't think that Winston Churchill really has much more to do in this war.
Yeah, he starts being more on the political side of things as opposed to the military side of things, and this is how he'll end up being Prime Minister during the next one.
I think that for the most
thought
part,
he led the retreat out of Dunkirk, right? And
yeah, that's
then
World
he
War
came
II.
back.
That's
Yep.
World War. That's
Oh,
World
that
War
is World
II.
War II. Damn it. Okay. Man, we need to get to that war. I know way more about it.
No, Churchill at this point has now been sidelined almost completely, and he's not really going to return in World War One. Not as a major figure.
Okay, so the Germans push. Do they make it back to the original start of the battle lines, or do they
Close.
actually push through?
No. They get they get close to where the original lines were. They stabilize basically along the same lines. The Germans can't push through. The problem that the Germans have is they don't have the troops. They don't have the manpower on the Western Front to actually capitalize, right, on any kind of major breakthrough at this point. They just don't have the numbers.
Are they using when you guys were talking about combined forces? I was also DMing Eldritch Gods, so I was a little distracted. But I was thinking about the combined forces. Why weren't they using tanks, infantry, and air support? Why weren't they?
Why
Because
was
the Germans-
Why weren't the Germans?
Because the Germans basically didn't really have tanks. They had the A7V, which they only made about 20 of them during the entire war. They were capturing Mark IVs and Mark Is during certain battles and whatnot, but these were all in handfuls, and they really didn't know how to use them. They didn't really have much of much faith in them. They did have air power, and they as with fucking last episode, they did use air power and close air support, and they were starting to figure that out.
Well, but the Germans on the Western Front don't have
air superiority.
Yeah, they in fact, air superiority is on the Allied side.
Mm-hmm.
The Germans are able to. They've created the circuses. They've created the flying circuses. But the purpose of the flying circuses, all right, is basically to harass the enemy in the air, all right, and try to limit their ability. All right, it's a defensive technique. It is not done in the offense, and they're able to have success to a degree, but they are on the defense. They are. It's a way of them to be able to conserve their own forces. All right, in these battles, they can't. It isn't the big Luftwaffe flown over the skies with just a few pilots running against them. They're outnumbered heavily at this point, especially when America joins the war, because okay, now you got the whole contingent of American pilots. Yeah, they're flying the British and the French equipment, but that's not a problem anymore. Okay, all right. So all of a sudden they are way on the defensive as far as aerial operations goes. The Germans just don't have the ability to mount these kind of things.
Yeah, basically, even if they wanted to, they couldn't.
Well, is it really the fact that America is so gigantic, and we have even if we were pulling a China or a Russia and just throwing flunkies at somebody repeatedly, we have the manpower to do that.
But we don't use
for
it
like 10 years.
To an extent, we do.
But we really don't want to use you like that, because we've already found that doing that really doesn't work. And this is the reason why, while yes, you're there, like I keep saying, we're not expecting you to fire a shot until a little bit later, so that when you do start firing a shot, you're going to kill more enemy than get yourselves killed.
Yeah, the idea.
Well, no, but even the air support, right? When you're looking at the pilots have been coming over for what, 2 years already, right?
Well, they're being more utilised, and you had that the fucking escadrille that the American pilots have been there pretty much the whole time in some form or fashion. But when they start being utilised, yeah, especially in the air, it didn't take that long to train up a pilot back in those days. So the Americans were being utilised in the air, but this is now at the point where the Germans can't really put up much of a fight. So whilst yes, they are seeing action, they're seeing action initially. There isn't very much action for them to see, so they will be more utilised in close air support and ground attack and things like that for the most part. And yes, they are being utilised straight away pretty much with respect to the ground forces, but it's mostly the ground forces that we really want to try and protect. We don't want to just waste them in the first battle.
No, and I do have one question before we do end up wrapping up, because I know we're getting towards the end. General Patton, he was a general in World War II. He wasn't a general in World War I. Where is he? Is he actually, is he enlisted?
No, he's an officer. All right, he's a major in one of the cavalry units initially. All right, and then he's put on in charge of a group of a battalion in World War I in 1918, and he does serve on the front lines. In fact,
he was related to a Confederate general. I can't remember which one, but his heritage actually goes back to the Confederacy.
There's a lot of generals that have officers back then. Remember, the military was a lot different than it is today, and one of the aspects was you always had officers who their grandfather served in a war, their great grandfather served in a war, their father served in a war, they were officers, their sons are officers. There's always been a martial tradition amongst certain families that's very much celebrated, and it still is today. You're now seeing that though now start to take place in the enlisted ranks, where you never saw it in the enlisted ranks, but you're in the officer ranks. You always had that kind of martial philosophy.
Is that actually coming more to the forefront? Because I thought that was kind of starting to fade away. Actually,
no, I think you're starting to see it more and more in the enlisted ranks. You're seeing more and more people that are in the military that their fathers were sergeants or their mothers were a sergeant major or something along those lines. You're seeing it more and more.
And that's just due more to like the time, space, and all this kind of stuff. Like as we mentioned before, like the last time America had seen a war was pretty much the Civil War, and not counting the Mexican-American War and things like that. And then we have World War One. Then 20 years later, the next generation going off to World War Two, and within 10 years of that, the next generation are going off to Korea, and then within 10 years of that, the next generation are going off to Vietnam, and then another 20, 30 year gap, and then the next generation are off in Iraq, and then their kids are now over in the sandbox at the moment.
Yeah, which it'll be a long time before we even approach Desert Storm or anything like that. I do believe after we wrap up World War One, I wanted to talk to you, MC, either Nam or World War II. I think those are our next choices. So, Nam is going to be a fight the whole time. But, World War II, not so much. Vietnam was an unconstitutional war. It was, quote unquote, a police action, which makes it completely illegal, in my solemn opinion.
Once again, how Congress sits there and declares war is not specified in the Constitution. To make that comment, all right,
well,
especially,
then,
hold on,
then,
I'm not finished.
Then by the 10th Amendment, then it's held.
It
by the
doesn't
states
matter what
respectively.
your view of the 10th Amendment is. It is that gets to be decided by the Supreme Court. That decision has been made. Now, you can argue about it all you want. You can not like it all you want. You can disagree with it all you want. But it has been adjudicated by the highest court in the land as being constitutional. Deal with it.
And it might seem like unconstitutional to you, but when we do get into Vietnam, you'll find that, the rest of the players in it, i.e. the Australians, the Laotians, the Koreans, and all these other people, we had a different point of view on the whole matter. It might have been wrong, but we still had a different point of view.
That will be an interesting conversation to have, and I'm welcome to that conversation. When it comes to the French, they sold us out on this one.
Yeah, they capitulated as usual.
If you want to talk about Vietnam, you're going to have to start back in the campaign with the French in the North Vietnam.
Well, it actually starts back in World War II.
It really doesn't heat up until the 1950s and Dien Bien Phu and so forth. But
okay, well, all right. The Germans stabilized the line. Where are we gonna go next week? What do you guys want to talk about? Because that's right around when I'm flying down to Shreveport. So
I think
Candy
we'll just
can
do a
stop
wrap.
calling me a fake Southerner. I'll be back home.
Okay, and I think that next week we'll do the next month, and then the following week, if you don't mind, or the following time after that, when you get the time, we'll go back to. We'll do a large talk about the Bolshevik Revolution, and really delve into that.
That sounds great to me. What do you think, Farty?
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you guys coming out. Please hit like, subscribe, go check out MC. He does his morning show. Almost every morning, right?
I missed a day this week, or last week, but generally Monday through Friday, 6:30 in the morning, Mountain Standard Time.
Yeah, no, and as the election season starts to kick up, you're gonna be going at the Democrats pretty hard, right?
No, I'm going to be talking about the great political problem of the world, the coronavirus.
Oh, yeah, that has me nervous now.
You're look. Don't be nervous, okay?
Dude, I'm getting on an airplane in a week. You know what I mean?
You're fine. There's nothing's going to happen. People are over this call for an emergency declaration in Washington. It's ridiculous. It's overhyped. They're overreacting. Now, I understand some of their overreaction, but it's way overreacting. You still don't have a mass outbreak of like 10 or 15 cases in Washington, and yet you're calling out a national emergency. You're declaring an emergency for it. I think people are overreacting to the fear of this thing. Now, granted, it can spread, and it will spread. There will be cases in the United States, but overall, for the most part, they've got a handle on this. This is not going down the same trajectory that you saw in China, and the reason is because we're not reacting the same way that the Chinese are reacting. All right, we're monitoring the situation. When people get sick, they get tested, and then if they come back with the disease, they're like, okay, we're going to find out who you've been in contact with, and we're going to take appropriate action at that point. They're not the idea that this is going to kill millions and millions of people. All right, could it theoretically? Yeah. Is it going to? No, I don't believe it is, because overall.
So you don't believe we have a Spanish flu epidemic proportion?
No, this is not going to go to like that. It may get to that. It may get to those numbers because of China, but other than that, no.
Yeah, you got to stop playing Plague Inc.
Well, no, because the Spanish flu was no joke, guys. The influenza.
But you've also got to remember too, like the Spanish
bad.
flu was just on the heels of World War One, where you had guys coming back from places where they were getting dysentery and malaria from poor health and poor immune systems. The general health of the population, lots of people were malnourished, therefore their immune systems were crap anyways. There wasn't the same kind of quarantine and control procedures that we've got nowadays. People are generally more healthier. We've got better sort of ways of dealing with this now than what we ever did back in those days. So,
I know I'm getting on an airplane, which is a closed circulation air system that's pressurized. And so everybody's germs is all over everybody else.
Well, you act like they don't filter those things. They do. Now, the air is filtered. Is it perfect? No. All right, but you're
I don't want to die, MC.
Okay,
well, if it's your time to go, it's your time to go. There's nothing that can fucking stop that, mate.
Damn it, Farty.
even if you would catch the coronavirus, the chances of you dying are not even in from a percentage standpoint. It's not even in the high 1% right now. I wouldn't worry about it, especially because of your age and things like that. All right, this is going to hit the elderly and the very young far worse if they get sick. They're going to struggle with it more than everyone else.
That's the only thing I'm worried about at the moment is some fucking dirty gook bastard or some fucking dirty muzzo shit from fucking Iran goes and visits the bloody nursing home my mum's in and it goes through there like wildfire. That's the thing I'm worried about.
That would be something to worry about is, the nursing homes, daycare centers, stuff like that.
Well, schools are the biggest concern in the United States, to be honest. Yes, nursing homes would be an issue as well, but overall, it's the schools that become the real problematic areas.
But no, we're totally divergent here. So, Farty, once again, thank you for hosting, my friend. Welcome to the brand, and hey, we'll be back. Actually, I think I'll be back in about 20 minutes talking about Picard if Voice of One is still awake. So, double header. We'll see you soon.
If there's anyone from Exiled Opinions here in the audience, I'll let you know now that next week's going ahead regardless.
Oh, absolutely. And we did do a drinking game last night. That was fun. If I'm not around next week, because I am flying out around 12:30 at night on the 9th, or the 10th, I guess. Kind of. I mean, what? I'm boarding the plane at 11:30. I'm flying out on the red eye. That's right. I'm flying out on the red eye. It'll be a fun 9.5 hour trip. But I do plan on checking out some Confederate monuments.
It's not 9.5 hours.
There's an hour and 15 minutes in Houston.
No,
but it's 9.5 hours total.
No, it's not. It's 7 hours total.
My itinerary says 9.5.
I'll have to look back at your itinerary, but because I think that you land at 9 o'clock in Shreveport.
9 a.m. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's 2 hours back. That means 7. That means you were from 12 to 7. That's 7 hours, dude.
Oh wait, you're doing that weird time travel thing?
Yeah.
No,
Well,
I don't count the time zones.
You're going to be in a new time zone. You're going to have to adjust your watch.
Oh, you got a smartwatch. It should do it by itself.
I know, right? What is up with that? Like jet lag? Is that a real thing?
All right, jet lag happens.
Not for that short.
Jet lag happens more because your body expends a lot more water at altitude. So therefore, if you drink a lot of water, you're good to go. Now, if you're drinking alcohol, you're going to increase it.
Son of a bitch. I'm drinking alcohol on the trip. I already have this planned. I'm getting a couple bottles of Jack Daniels and some
jet
Coke,
lag's more for when you're traveling extremely long distances and you're covering, like, say, you leave at, say, 5 o'clock in the morning and then you arrive at, like, say, 7 o'clock at night. And so you've just woken up and you've got to go to sleep again, pretty much.
Oh, like I sleep at night?
Well, I find with my insomnia, like I've never experienced jet lag, so I guess that's my secret. So, yeah.
I know, right? But hey, everybody, once again, thank you very much. Good night, good luck. Don't go to France without a yellow vest or a big, deep trench. Go ahead and end it, Farty. We're out of here.
30.